One secret that we've learned for sure is prioritizing distinctiveness over differentiation. How can you create a brand that every time someone sees it, they're like, oh, that's Fox's Bow. If it's on social, if it's in real life, it's on shelf, it's in a bar. How can we make it so distinctive that there's no mistaking that that's another brand?
Welcome to Marketing Happy Hour, a weekly podcast helping marketing professionals and entrepreneurs build better strategies and hit career goals. I'm Cassie.
And I'm Allie. We're marketers and your hosts through these unfiltered convos with your peers and experts in the space.
Let's dive in. Grab your favorite drink and let's get to this week's episode. Today, I am joined by Alice Carroll, co-founder of Fox's Bow Irish Whiskey. I started my career in the food and beverage space, and so always just love hearing from founders of different brands popping up and just the creative process behind launching and kind of the story and the why behind it. So Alice, welcome to the show. I'm so stoked to have you.
Thank you very much. So excited to be here.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we're going to dive into everything about your story and just strategies that you've learned along the way. But first, I'm going to kind of reframe the typical marketing happy hour question that we ask, which is what's in your glass? And I would just love for you during that segment, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about the brand.
Absolutely. Well, what is always in my glass is Fox's Bow. So we are an Irish whiskey. We're still pretty new. We only launched in the US about 2 years ago. But we are very much kind of focused on, I suppose, contemporizing a very traditional category and a category that plays into exclusivity and who it's for and who it's not for and all of these perceived rules that are so outdated and so nonsense. So for us, we really believe that whiskey should be for whoever and wherever people want to drink it. So yeah, that is why we kind of started Fox's Bow, and you'll see even from an aesthetic perspective, it's very vibrant, very contemporary, very modern, very not in keeping with the kind of sea of black and green traditional bottles that exist. And that's on purpose, and that comes through in everything that we do, even in terms of the whiskey that we've released. So our kind of hero SKU is aged in bourbon barrels. So we are pleasantly surprised, I suppose, whenever bourbon drinkers tell us that they don't drink Irish whiskey, they try Fox's Bow and their minds are changed. And then we have a lot of fun too with kind of the different finishes that we use to really create something that's very accessible from a flavor perspective. But as I said, like very modern, contemporary, and for today's drinkers.
Yeah, I love it. For someone who I lived in Kentucky for a little bit. So of course, that is the bourbon and whiskey space here in the US. And just seeing your brand pop up digitally, you do see that difference, right? And so I'm excited just to talk through, even just from a branding perspective, how you came up with that angle for the business. But it's very exciting to see, that differentiation piece, not only visually, but also taste wise. Right. And so very awesome to see how you guys have carved that space out in the market for yourselves. Yeah. Well, with that too, I would love to learn more about your story as well. So how did you get into this space? How did you end up just being a part of Fox's Bow? What's your journey like so far?
Yeah. So I was one of the people that I talk about when I talk about who whiskey is for and who it's not for, because when I was like in high school and in college, I definitely thought whiskey was not for me. It was like my dad's drink or my granddad's drink. It was strong. It was a guy's drink, an older guy, whatever. Like my drinks of choice were probably like, vodka soda or gin and tonic or whatever, like tequila soda, whatever. But when I was in college, I was doing marketing. I was doing business, but I was kind of majoring in marketing. And the graduate program that you wanted to get in Ireland when you were doing that course was the Jameson graduate program, because it was a marketing kind of graduate placement somewhere else in the world. And, it just seemed so fun, such a mix of kind of what you would learn on the graduate program and things like that. So I went for the program having maybe like tried whiskey a handful of times and deciding it wasn't for me, but I was like, I really want this job. So started on the Jameson graduate program, did like really amazing kind of training with them for a couple of weeks in the distillery in their head office in Dublin, and started to grow such an appreciation for the category that I was like, hold on a second, like I've totally wrote off this whole category of alcohol, even like subcategories like the bourbon and the Scotch and the Irish, I have just said that's not for me. Why have I done that? Like that has been like a subconscious thing that I have done, which makes absolutely no sense. And the more that I kind of immersed myself in the world of whiskey, the more I was like, actually, this should be one of the most versatile spirits in the world, because there's so many different styles and flavor profiles and everything. So it's like a social thing that we think that it's only for a certain type of person. And that message has definitely been perpetuated by different brands and things like that. But it really kind of sparked my interest in the category. And the more I was introduced to different styles of whiskey and also different ways of drinking it, including in cocktails or mixed or whatever, the more I was like, oh, like, this is really interesting that I felt this way and it's been changed so quickly. So there's like a bigger issue at hand here, and there's a bigger opportunity because whiskey is so versatile. So I worked with Jameson in France for a little while. And then I moved with the company over to Toronto in Canada, and I was there for about 6 years. And moved on from Jameson, always kind of worked in whiskey in different kind of capacities. I was on Scotch, I was on Canadian whiskey, dipped in and out of Irish whiskey. I did a stint on tequila and rum as well, which was really interesting and brought me to hotter places for a change, which was nice. But always found my way back to whiskey. And I suppose working across like such amazing household brands, I knew that I was so passionate about the category, but I also knew that I was so passionate about opening up the category beyond the limitations that were created and kind of that some of the brands I was working on were like leaning into that I really didn't agree with. So, you know, tried to bring forward suggestions about how to open up whiskey to new drinkers, to women, to younger consumers, things like that. But I suppose because I was working on such established brands, their tolerance for risk was a lot lower. And for me, it doesn't feel like a risk trying to open up the category to women or trying to open up the category to younger consumers. But I guess for them, they felt that could alienate existing drinkers. They're like their older demographic and things like that. So I kind of just got to the point where I was like, no, you know what? There is a gap here. Like there is a white space. There's an opportunity here that the big multinational brands are not taking seriously. And the fact that I felt that myself as a consumer is really important, because I think that for any category like alcohol or beyond, that is the true indicator of a true white space, is if you as a consumer feel like there's something missing for you. So I guess with Fox's Bow, the timing was weirdly serendipitous, because I was kind of getting frustrated with this dynamic in the multinationals. And my co-founder, who I grew up across the road with at home in Limerick in Ireland, he rang me. He was working for Google in Silicon Valley in the US. And he was like, look, I have this idea to open this distillery. Like, what do you think? And I was like, funny you should mention that. So like the timing, we always say, was so weird. Like he was ringing me because he knew I worked in alcohol and he had no idea. He just had this idea, but he had no idea how to bring it to life. And I was like, well, actually, there's a bigger opportunity than that around like creating a brand that is really accessible and like allows people into this really like closed off category. So yeah, that's how we got up to today.
Oh my goodness. So many things were coming to mind as you were sharing. You know, one of the things is finding that white space and that need that you as the consumer have that you can fulfill. Chances are if you have the need, other people have the need. Or if they don't know they have the need yet, once they notice that there's an opportunity for a new product, you know, for example, they come on your pages and they see you sharing about it, you know, other women or people who are interested in the space, but not really sure where to start, they can hear you sharing on it, and it creates that connection and that it piques that interest to dive into it more. So I love that. And that's why that humanization of the brand also comes into play, right? Because you're allowed to build trust with the consumer or the potential consumer and kind of open the door for them to learn more, which we'll talk about that more in a little bit. But I just love the idea of seeing a need and just speaking to that need immediately, and also just creating something that's a little bit different in the marketplace. So Yeah, very excellent. Well, speaking of that, as you mentioned at the top of the episode, you're in a very traditional industry, right? A lot of the brands feel the same. They feel like they're for one specific person. So even just from a design standpoint, again, highly recommend if you're listening, go jump on Fox's Boat Instagram and you kind of just see firsthand what we're talking about here. But how do you, when you were kind of coming up with this concept for something different, how did you and how do you recommend getting stakeholders to say yes to a design or identity that looks nothing like what is typically in your industry?
That's such a good question. And it is a challenge because obviously you can't point to someone who's doing something similar and say like, look, they're having success with this. If we follow the same route, we're going to have success with it too, because that brand doesn't exist. We're essentially bringing something completely new to the category. So for us, I think it's really the articulation around the fixation with the consumer as opposed to the fixation with the category. So, if we're laser focused on who this is for, and we start thinking about, right, like what other, not just alcohol, like some alcohol, some beer, some, adjacent spirits, wine, whatever, but also beyond that, what are these consumers buying and why? And also like, what are they consuming? Like, what's their source of information? What media do they follow? Who do they follow on Instagram? All of these questions where, similar to kind of, I guess, the Amazon model, you're fixating with the consumer. And I think if you're able to demonstrate a true consumer pain point or want or need, and how other brands are fulfilling that in different ways outside of alcohol, but that pain point still isn't being fulfilled within kind of your category, in our case, alcohol. I think that's the way to get stakeholders on board, because that's fact. Like, that's not your hypothesis, it's fact. How you position your brand to take advantage of that is hypothesis, because it's how you think that will work. But the like hard, cold facts, and that's the best thing that you can possibly do to bring to your, stakeholders, is like as much fact as you possibly can. You get that by looking at adjacent brands that are doing well to fulfill that want or need. And so I think that that's probably the best approach.
Yeah. And then I'm just curious too, with that, was there, consumer surveys that you guys did just to even further validate your concept, or research? Or I would love to hear more on that, because I think a lot of times too, we see a concept at hand and we think it's going to be an incredible idea, but even coming back with more research and more testing can help push it forward even more. So just curious if there was any level of that done as well in that process.
There was. Yeah. And that's such a good point, Cassie, because I think, like, especially for an independent brand, you obviously don't have, infinite resources, including time. So we tend to just run at something, which you should do. Like, don't get me wrong, you shouldn't get tied up in delays. Those two things, I suppose, kind of run in tandem, like you moving at pace, but also you testing in real time. So specifically for us, one of those kind of key stakeholders, I suppose, was retailers. And because we couldn't point at another brand that was doing it well, that we were mimicking and that had success, we had to have some type of data point to be able to say, look, consumers actually want this. So as we were kind of running with the design concept and, even the like formula creation and things like that, we underwent consumer research studies with Opinions, a consumer research agency, where we were testing things like the product proposition, the flavor profile. It wasn't people actually trying it in real life. It was their openness to a product like this. So we were showing it relative to our competitive set, shelf standout, likelihood of you purchasing something like this, your interest in hearing more about a brand like this, and those kind of things, to demonstrate that this brand had at least, I suppose, appeal and stickiness and piqued interest with our target demographic. So we were able to bring that information to our retailers and say, listen, 93% of whiskey drinkers that we asked are really interested in a proposition like this. They feel like it has standout on shelf. Even from a pricing perspective, when we were able to say, this is the product proposition, this is the size, this is the flavor profile, what would you expect to pay for a bottle like that? So it even helped with our pricing strategy and things like that. So we ran all of that in tandem, and kind of as we were getting the information, we were sharing that with stakeholders so that we could keep moving forward and get those listings before we had any type of proof of sales data, let's say. So yeah, anything that you can do like that is so valuable.
Before we get back to the episode, we wanted to take a moment to tell you about our latest offering for marketing professionals.
We get asked all the time where marketers can actually connect outside the podcast.
So we built it, the MHH Collective.
Monthly live sessions with us and industry experts, real career conversations in a Slack space that's actually helpful and not noisy.
If you want to learn with people, not just listen, we'd love to have you.
If you want to join us, you can find the link in the show notes below. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for speaking to that. And, I'm curious from a founder perspective, and even just being in a space that is very male dominated in general, how has being kind of the quote only one, for example, served as a fantastic creative advantage for you when building the brand, or even just from a getting your foot in the door standpoint, or bringing a different perspective to a space? Just would love to hear more on that too.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think like the simple answer is diversity of thought and diversity of perspective. Like the more diverse the people at the table, the more kind of diverse the experience that they've had, and the more diverse the conversation becomes. I think like that's kind of the short answer, but I suppose like a bit of a longer answer is there's a fantastic book, David and Goliath, by Malcolm Gladwell, and the whole point of the book is basically that perceived disadvantages can be advantages and perceived advantages can be disadvantages. And one of the kind of parallels that I think is really relevant for this conversation is they basically talk about people with dyslexia, and actually a disproportionate amount of entrepreneurs have dyslexia. And when they kind of dug into why that is, it's because when kids are in school and they're not learning in a linear way because they have dyslexia, as school is kind of taught in a very particular way, they have to find a way to get to the same endpoint as another kid, but they can't do it in that linear way. So their mind is trained from a young age to like find the way, even if it's not the most obvious, even if it's not the most linear. And that makes so much sense then when you think about those people are so primed to be an entrepreneur, because to be an entrepreneur, it's not the linear way. You have to find whatever route it takes to get to that final destination, and you have to get creative. And I think the same applies, or similar applies in this instance, because, I wasn't given a seat at the table when it was all kind of men dominating the conversation, or I wasn't given credibility in those initial conversations. My co-founder is male. He doesn't come from the whiskey world, but every question relative to the whiskey was always kind of thrown his way by default, as opposed to asking me. So there's kind of a lot of that you're up against from day dot. And because of that, it makes you be creative in how you kind of assert authority in the whiskey space, or even how you come at it, because you can't come at it in the traditional way, because the traditional way is dominated by men. So it forces you to come at it from a more creative and a different way. And actually, I think that's such an advantage when it comes to kind of these conversations, because it creates something completely different when it comes to kind of the narrative around whiskey, around Irish whiskey, because it's not that linear traditional direction that you can take, So I think even though it's definitely challenging, it's still challenging. I still get asked, do I actually drink whiskey, even though I have my own whiskey brand, things like that are frustrating. But I actually perceive it to be much more of an advantage, because it's made me not even remove myself from the traditional. I was never part of that conversation. It's made me come at, whiskey and conversations and making sure I'm getting a seat at the table from such a different starting point than it would, I suppose, a male counterpart.
Yeah. And I guess that's also just the power of being so strong and bullish in your idea or what you're passionate about, right? Too, because it can be hard, going into an industry where you're maybe not typically the ICP of whoever's building whatever that brand or product is. And so just knowing that no matter what doubts come your way, being so excited and so passionate about what you're creating and confident in that idea. I know for at least me, that's been been helpful. But yeah, that's such a good reminder. And don't ever think that just because you don't see someone that looks like you in a specific space does not mean you don't have the opportunity to get there. And just keep going. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. So we've already talked about this a little bit, but you are very much a face on the brand's social channels. And so we talk a lot about this, human first approach in marketing, or just putting a face to the brand and the power of that connection, right? So I'm curious, from your perspective in building Fox's Bow, what has been the impact of that human first approach for you guys, and how has you being able to connect directly with the consumer just helped shape not only the brand itself, but just the way that you get the word out about the business too?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think initially, like, to us as consumers, it seems very obvious that people buy from people. Like any of the kind of brands that I follow, or people that I follow, the journey or anything like that, I love hearing firsthand from whether it's a founder or someone on the journey, about that journey and about that product and kind of the behind the scenes warts and all. That makes me more bought in for a product than the generic brand content. And we kind of did a mix of every type of content at the start to kind of see what was resonating and things like that. And we definitely found that any of the content that we were releasing, that was myself or my co-founder Tony talking, whether it was polished content or whether it was a bit more raw and gritty, that was the content that performed the best, much more so than brand focused content, even cocktail focused content, anything like that. And I think fundamentally, whether we like it or not, that is what resonates with people. So it's so important to be the one telling the story. And I think as well, no one is ever going to care as much about your brand or your product or be as kind of energetic and enthusiastic as you are. Like, we have the best team in the world, but we could never expect anyone to speak about our baby the way we speak about our baby, because it's our baby. So I think that that's so important, because especially like nowadays, you're bombarded by so much branded content and so many ads all day, every day, that we kind of have a bullshit filter now where we are able to kind of switch that off. So if you can authentically connect with your audience or connect with your target audience, you should be very much trying to do that. And I think the most credible way and authentic way to do that is through kind of founder content and human-led content.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And for some brands and founders, they say, yes, I know that is a great idea and thing that I want to do, but I'm camera shy, or I don't have much to share, or what am I going to say about my brand, for example. So I guess I would just love to hear your advice to brand leaders, founders, whoever, for finding their voice and representing a brand authentically without it maybe feeling a little bit too salesy or pushy. How do you find that balance personally?
So it has taken me such a long time. Like, now I'm able to just do it. But for so long, I'd be like cringing at myself. I'd literally record the thing 500 times and like mess up in the last second. Like, I would get so frustrated. I would hate the sound of my own voice. It would be like, nails on a chalkboard, where I was like, no one is going to want to listen to this. Like, this is horrendous. And I think the biggest thing that you have to do for your brand is just like get over the ego, like just park it. And in terms of like finding your voice and finding, what you should be talking about, or what's relevant or whatever, let your audience tell you that. So like, put up as much information as you possibly can, like the behind the scenes, the journey, the product attributes, why you chose something, and why you didn't choose something else. And very quickly, your audience or your target audience will tell you what they're interested in by engaging, and you'll be able to create more of that content. And I think we sometimes think certain things are boring because we're in and out of it every day, and we're like, this isn't the sexy stuff, like this isn't what people want to hear about. But that is what people want to hear about. Like, they want to hear about, what one time I ordered 20 billboards for a campaign that we were running around South by Southwest in Austin. And the billboards were printed, they were about to be applied. And I basically was informed that like one little thing I had put on it was non-compliant. So we had to pull the 20 billboards. The 20 billboards got delivered to my apartment. Like I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment at the time. So we just had stacks of billboards everywhere. And I just was like, this is such an epic fail. Like, I'm so embarrassed. I can't believe this happened. You know, like, I'm such a rookie. This is such amateur hour. And I was like, oh, feck it. Like, I'm just going to post about this because, like, I just, if you don't laugh, you're going to cry. So I just need to, like, share how ridiculous this is. People loved it because they don't want to see, like, the perfectly shiny journey to the top. They want to see, like, the graft and, like, you fall back a bit and then you move forward. And people then, like, get in your corner because they're like, oh my God, it's so human. It's so, like, normal. It's a shitty thing that happened, but, like, you're laughing at it and you're laughing with me. So, like, yeah, I think we think things are boring, but actually people are interested in that. And, like, I'm interested in that. Like, I love seeing, you know, the behind the scenes journey and, like, different aspects of people's businesses. Like, that is the interesting part.
Yep. And everyone's been there, right? Like every founder has had, if it's not a billboard, it's something else, right? And so I think just destigmatizing those kind of challenges, and it makes other people feel seen too, I think, by sharing that. So it's so powerful, and there's a lot of lessons to learn through that. And so it's just value for your audience as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So one of the things that you've mentioned before is this idea of, quote, stealing secrets from other top brands or just sparking inspiration from other brands that you've worked with in the past. I guess my question to you is, if you could give our listeners one secret to building a brand that actually stands out, what would it be?
I definitely say stealing secrets in jest, but I think one secret that we've learned for sure is prioritizing distinctiveness over differentiation. And what I mean by that is, like, instead of looking at your category and being like, right, do you know what's missing here is this? I actually think it's kind of going back to that point that we were chatting about earlier. It's like obsessing with your consumer and being like, right, what do they care about? And, like, from an aesthetic perspective, what are they buying elsewhere? Like, what does that look like? What are the themes? You know, what are they drawn to? And I think that helps you create a really distinctive brand, because you can then borrow from those themes and create something for your category instead of being limited by the kind of perceived rules or, like, the standard kind of playbook of your category. So for us, like a big secret or a not so secret is, like, forget about differentiation, think about distinctiveness. Like, how can you create a brand that every time someone sees it, they're like, oh, that's Fox's Bow, no matter where it is sitting, you know, what asset it is, if it's on social, if it's in real life, it's on shelf, it's in a bar. How can we make it so distinctive that, like, there's no mistaking that that's another brand? It's clearly Fox's Bow.
Yeah, absolutely. And then with that too, you know, you've already mentioned a few that you would stand by, but if there was one marketing or creative hill, quote unquote, that you would die on in 2026, what would it be? Or just something, a principle or trend or foundation that you say, this is my thing that I'm going to prioritize going into the rest of this year, what would it be?
I think the hill that I would die on is that, so I'm going to do aesthetics first. Clean girl aesthetic is going to be out.
Okay.
And
I love it.
I'm so ready for it to be out. There was a fantastic article in the New York Times recently, and it was about a guy. He was talking about how he's taking up drinking again. And he had given it up. It was, like, such an extreme, which I feel has just been, like, the modus operandi of our generation for the last, like, maybe 3 years, where everything went clean. Like, it was all about the, like, getting up first thing on a Saturday morning and doing the Pilates, and even the raves at the coffee shops first thing in the morning, and everything was about clean girl aesthetic, and everyone was wearing the same clothes, and they were all beige, and they were all, like, soft green, and, you know, it was all about kind of this extreme toward wellness and everything like that. Whereas his whole point was, like, I am missing out this, like, core community and social get together that is, like, having a few drinks, and it's not going absolutely wild, but it's like that, like, we're all social beings, so, like, we crave that connection that, like, really only that kind of third space bar or drinks with friends at a house or over dinner or whatever kind of fulfills. So I think the pendulum probably swung way this way toward like clean girl aesthetic and wellness and everything like that. And now it's like slowly finding that like middle balance where you're like, do you know what? Like we can do a little bit of everything. Like, you know, there's pleasures in life that we shouldn't be totally writing off, because they do scratch an itch for us and they fulfill something for us, like personally. So I think, yeah, clean girl aesthetic, that like extreme way of living, I think is out in 2026, and we're going to find a little bit more of a balance. And I think that that's going to come through in kind of product and creative projects as well, where we're going to see a little bit more originality and color and vibrancy kind of injected back into everything, like from the brands that are coming to market and even activations and things like that. It's just going to be a little bit more fun, vibrant, creative, and less uniform, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, I love that. It's kind of this lesson too. And, you know, yes, pay attention to the trends and what's going on, and you can implement some of those strategies that align with that. But at the end of the day, if you're not owning who you are as a brand, there's that disconnect in the long run, right?
Yeah.
So that balance especially is really important. And I think to your point, and kind of the whole concept of this conversation is this idea of standing out, and you stand out by being different. Even though trend says one thing doesn't mean you can't do the other, right? So I love that reminder. So thanks for sharing.
Of course.
Yeah. Well, this has been fantastic, Alice. Thank you so much for just joining and sharing just your personal story as well as the story of the brand. But as we would close out here, I would love to just know, where can we learn more about Fox's Bow? Where can we connect with you online? Tell us all the places to follow along with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're on all social platforms at Fox's Bow Whiskey. And then I personally am on all social platforms as well at Whiskey Alice. And if you want to try some of our whiskey, which is absolutely delicious, we actually just launched our little Fox's Bow whiskey pouches, which are 100 milliliters, so like 2 whiskey serves. And these are available on our website, foxesbowwhiskey.com. But again, really kind of demonstrating what I was saying in terms of like being hyper consumer focused. Yep. We were thinking about all of the places that people drink nowadays, and a lot of those aren't glass friendly and definitely aren't large format friendly. So, you know, we were thinking backyard barbecues, going to a festival, going to a game. We were like, how do we create something that fulfills those moments for consumers too? So we created these first world pouches. So these are available on our website as well for people to try. But yeah.
Amazing. Well, we'll have all of the links below as well. So please go check out Alice's channels as well as Fox's Bow. But Alice, thank you again so much for being here. Really appreciate you coming on and sharing everything with us.
Thank you so much, Cassie.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Marketing Happy Hour.
If you enjoyed it, make sure you're subscribed to the show and sign up for a weekly newsletter with insights and marketing resources.
We also invite you to check out the MHH Collective, our community for marketers looking to connect, grow, and learn together.
Check out the links in the show notes. We'll see you next time.